Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Eddie Cotogno. Not sure if I'm saying that correctly. We are going to Bonnet, Scotland today. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! Hi guys, how are we? Hope you're all okay. Hope you've had a wonderful week. We are heading into the weekend. Boom. I'm down for it. Very excited. Today's case, we haven't been to Scotland for a while. Scottish. I've never had haggis. It sounds grim, but I bet it's one of those things that's like tastes nicer than it sounds, and it is, if you know what I mean. Anyhow, I've digressed massively before we've even begun. Today we are going to Dumbarton in Scotland, and it is 1979. This case has crossovers with another killer, and it sparked my interest massively. The body of Eddie was discovered in the July 1979 in his home that was actually on fire, aflame. At first, not for very long, it was thought that he had died from smoke inhalation, but where his body was and what was around his body and all sorts of, it was suspicious. And then the autopsy actually showed that he had been bludgeoned to death with a hammer. When the fire was put out, what they found was that his body was found surrounded by pornographic photographs. Many. That's almost sort of cult-like satanic sort of ritual, isn't it? So his body was discovered, and then strewn around were these photographic photos. What? Pornographic, Sophie. So let's talk about Eddie, because that's not that unusual when you hear who he was. Eddie was 63 years old at the time of his murder, and he lived in a top floor flat, and the attic of that flat was his workshop. He was not a usual artiste of any kind. His, I'm going to say profession, I can't think of another, he took pornographic photographs of women. Therefore, the fact that his body was found on a blood-soaked mattress in the workshop, surrounded by pornographic images that, had been placed all around him, now it doesn't sound so unbelievable and crazy and like, oh, what's that? It doesn't now. However, the reason that I turn my nose up at the pornographic images, pornographic photography, whatever, if people are consenting and whatever floats your boat, really, but often that was not the case with the women that were going to Eddie's workshop. What is that noise? It's like the other day. Many of the young women, it was all sorts of ages really. They weren't always there knowing what they were getting in for. They were often forced, and it was just grim. It was grim. He would encourage vulnerable women to come to his workshop, have their photos taken, and said that this would be the beginning of their modelling career. It just makes me so angry. He would show women photographs of people like Marilyn Monroe before they were famous and say, oh, look, this is the sort of thing that they did before they found their fame and fortune, blah, blah, blah. Just very coercive, very coercive. Eddie would then take these photographs and sell them on. So it's so exploitative. Sometimes I get so cross with myself. He was exploiting them. Imagine going there thinking that you're going to start your modelling career, you get forced into taking your clothes off because you don't really have a choice, you're in some dingy attic with some man, and then those photos are then sold locally. I mean, just horrible, really awful. Worse than that though, local businessmen, they all knew about Eddie, and they would often pay him lots more money than just buying a photo to go up to his attic with these women that were there and have sex with them, or watch as other people did that in front of them. So it was just this horrible, I don't even want to use the word business. It was this horrible affair that he had set up. Yeah, it really was a workshop of hell. Eddie had a friend who we have heard of before. I've covered his case before, and it seems like he's just a gift that keeps on giving, not Angus Sinclair. Let's talk a little bit about Angus, just to remind ourselves of this chap. The World's End murders were the murders of Christine Eady, who was 17, and Helen Scott, who was also 17. They'd been out on a night out at the World's End pub. That's why their murders were named that. Both girls had been beaten, gagged, tied up, R-worded, and then strangled. This was in October 1977. Do go and watch the video that I covered of that case, because I go into all of the whole case. Angus has quite the history. I'm just going to go through some of it so that you can know who we're dealing with, if you haven't already seen that case or know of him. In 1961, he molested an 8-year-old girl and was sentenced to 3 years probation. In 1961, convicted of killing Catherine Rehill, who was 7, sentenced to 10 years in prison. He served 6 years. In 1970, he married Sarah Hamilton. In 1977, it is believed that he killed 6 women in a 7-month period. Frances Barker, 37, Hilda Macaulay, 36, Agnes Cooney, 23, Anna Kenny, 20, all from Glasgow, and then Christine Eady and Helen Scott, which is the World's End murders. Could you see my brain not going? 1978, murdered 17-year-old Mary Gallagher in Glasgow. 1980, illegal possession of a .22 caliber revolver. 1982, pleaded guilty to the R word and S assault of 11 children aged 6 to 14. He was sentenced to life in prison. 2000, cold case review of the Mary Gallagher murder. 2001, he was then convicted of Mary Gallagher's murder. 2007, trial for the murders of Christine Eady and Helen Scott collapses. And then 2014, there was a retrial and he was found guilty of their murders. That is a brief overview of Angus Sinclair. The same Angus Sinclair is friends with Eddie. Angus would find lots of women for Eddie to photograph. What a pleasant chap. What Angus did at first was he would bring Eddie women, ladies of the night from Glasgow, and bring them back for Eddie to... that makes sense, doesn't it? Because they were willing. They wanted the extra cash. So they would go with Angus and they would go to Eddie's workshop of hell, and they would willingly have their photographs taken and have intercourse with these businessmen that would come round, because they wanted the extra cash. But this was actually too expensive, because Eddie, he wanted the money. He wanted to profit from these women. He didn't want them... he wanted unwilling people, because he would charge the money to these businessmen and he would get that money. He didn't want that money going to a sex worker. So it didn't make any business sense for Eddie to have these women come round, because they wanted paying, and he didn't want that. He didn't want to pay these women. No. He wanted vulnerable women that he could manipulate and, what's that word? Exploit. Something that Sinclair was very good at was finding, funny enough, that this serial killer, finding vulnerable women, and he would prey on their vulnerable nature. So that's what he began to do. He stopped bringing in sex workers and he started finding vulnerable victims for Eddie. Was Sinclair benefiting from this? Was he getting paid, I wonder? I'm unsure how the pair met, but Eddie kind of had a double life, if you will, because he had day jobs, he had other jobs. He was an optical technician and a distillery security guard. Again, I ponder, he's got 2 jobs, mate. Where is the time for this? Well, I don't. I never understand it. Just so busy filling their time with these awful things and then going and having a day job as well. Blows my mind. Eddie was somewhat of an amateur sort of cameraman, but in his workshop he had it so that he could develop his films and things like that. So, it was a hobby. And Sinclair, I'm just struggling to see what the benefit was with Sinclair. I just think, was it a seedy hobby for him? And also, let's be real, he was probably R-wording women. I mean, this was in his other world. He was doing that and then murdering women. But with Eddie in this workshop, they had this thing going where they were getting vulnerable women, probably were R-wording these women and enjoying the photography at the same time. It's a lot of power and control as well. So you've got that person under your control. So I think it was just a very sick pairing. And obviously they're both getting off on what they're doing. Eddie also taught Sinclair how to develop photography, like black and white photography, and it was said that they had a falling out because Sinclair wanted to learn how to develop colour photographs and Eddie wouldn't show him how to do it. I'm not sure how much truth there is in that. That seems, but these are stupid people, so I guess. Nobody has ever been convicted for Eddie's murder, although it seems highly likely that it was Sinclair. The nature of what Eddie was doing, though, can you imagine how many boyfriends, dads, uncles, husbands would have been delighted to have a moment alone with Eddie? There has to be some women that spoke out to somebody and said about what had gone on. They probably would have remembered where they'd gone to have their... It's very brazen, isn't it, as well? Like, they took these women to his flat and his workshop and then I guess they just expected them not to say anything. They really must have been like it's such a sad thing, isn't it? He certainly wasn't arrested, or nobody had gone to the police to say about it, because otherwise he would have been arrested. Also, there is the possibility that a woman could have murdered Eddie. He was 63, he was exploiting women, someone could have taken their revenge. And the whole idea of revenge would fit in with the fact that all of those photos were scattered around him. It's like, that's like vengeful, isn't it? However, Sinclair and Eddie did fall out. Whether that is over colour photography or not, I don't know. But Sinclair had a number of affairs. He was just a piece of work. He had a number of affairs on Sarah, his wife, and two of those girlfriends at one point, I think they were referred to as K and M. He'd been having affairs with them in the 1970s, and he didn't know, but Eddie had then photographed those two women, so his ex-lovers, and he was selling their photos. They had gone to Eddie's studio, they had taken their clothes off, and they had this photo shoot with Eddie. Rumour had it that Sinclair was so angry, like really furious, because it was okay for Eddie to do these awful things and with vulnerable women that he didn't know, but when it was somebody that he knew, people that he had been with, and there's a lot of sort of control around this, like they were his, even though they were his ex-lovers, they were his. He had conquered them, they were his and his alone. And the fact that their photos were out locally for men to buy, it made him mad. And Eddie had not asked permission from Sinclair. This was all completely, he had no idea that it was going on. And it made him really furious. And it wasn't long after this that Eddie was murdered. After his murder, it turns out they interviewed like family of Eddie. Eddie was known as Wee Eddie. I can't do the accent, but that's what he was known as. I think he was obviously like small and unassuming. His family said that they'd spoken to Eddie and that he had said on the day of his murder that he was meeting an acquaintance. It's highly likely that this acquaintance was the person that murdered Eddie. Sinclair had a history of violence, putting aside all of the R words, assaults, anything to do with women. He also he would rob and things like that. And his choice of weapon in anything like that would be a hammer. He was only 5'4". He was quite a small man, Sinclair, so he needed something that he could use very quickly and effectively to render somebody unconscious or what have you. So a hammer was ideal for that. So he could like a blitz attack. The police did not issue the full details of the case in Eddie's murder, but it was a hammer that had been used to bludgeon Eddie to death. The police did speak to Sinclair after Eddie's murder. He was a person of interest, and this is bonkers. This blows my mind. But the police warned him that they were going to come and talk to him, and so I guess they ring, like, can we chat? I suppose how else do you sort of go about it? Because you can't arrest somebody if you don't believe they've. I suppose you have to sort of ring and say, "Oh, we need to talk to you about this." Maybe that's not as bonkers as it first sounded. But they said that they wanted to speak to him, which gave him time to tell Sarah, his wife, that he would need an alibi. So she did this on numerous occasions. She gave him alibis to the police that were not true, and he would tell her exactly what she should say. On this occasion, he told Sarah to tell the police that they had both been at his mother's for dinner on the night of Eddie's murder, and it wasn't true. The police hadn't actually told Sinclair what they wanted to question him about. And at the time, he was often being questioned by police because he was always committing some sort of crime or robbery. So they were often coming to his house to talk to him about some crime. But on this occasion, he actually said to Sarah, "This is going to be in regards to a friend of mine that has died." So he knew what they were going to talk to him about. Interesting. When they did talk to Sinclair, he recorded the entire conversation. Again, suspicious. Sinclair died in 2019, and it is thought that he took many, many secrets to the grave with him, that there were other women, just a lot of other crimes that he committed that he didn't speak about and he didn't confess to. So really, really sad, and a lot of families will then not get any closure, and Eddie's included. So it's thought that because Eddie was this sleazeball, basically, like I say, what he was doing was absolutely vile, really, really vile, and he was enmeshed and, having relationship with Sinclair, like a friendship. Like who does that? Who wants to be a friend with somebody like that, and an acquaintance even? He was a seedy piece of work. And because of that, it is thought that the police and the investigators and the detectives, they didn't really put much more effort into solving Eddie's murder. A little bit like good riddance sort of thing. It would seem that way anyway. And the case did go cold. It just sort of, there wasn't much more done about it. Part of me feels like Sinclair was the guilty party. He would have been really cross about the pictures of his ex-girlfriends. It would have really made him very angry. He was all about control. That was a big thing. Big, control and ownership of things and people. So that would have been enough for him to go and do that. And you can imagine that he would have thrown the photographs around in an angry statement sort of way. And you can also imagine somebody like Sinclair setting fire to destroy any evidence, because he was in that sort of world. Although he never tried to really hide or get rid of evidence at other crime scenes when he had committed murder before. So I'm not sure. Equally, it could have been somebody out for revenge for their loved one, their girlfriend, their partner. Also, play silly games, win silly prizes, because he also could have been swindling money out of businessmen and getting himself in trouble in that sort of way. It sounds like he just was, he was just not a very flavoursome person. It sounds like that could have been entirely possible as well, just swindling people for money. You never know who you're dealing with, eh? Anyhow, that is all I have for you on today's case. How are we all? Hope you've had a nice week. Nothing much to report here. I've been having myself a very hygge. I don't pronounce it that way. I like to call it hygge, but that's not right. I've been having a really chill week because I feel like it's half term next week. Just need to balance out my nervous system, keep myself in check, and and have some calm, quiet time. So I've had quite a peaceful week, and it's been lovely actually, because next week will be the absolute opposite with my kids and the noise levels. I swear that's why I have tinnitus, however you call it, whatever you say. I swear it's really bad at the moment because I had a cold. I was unwell, and I'm still a bit like bunged up. And I swear my tubes just go me. That freaking noise. I've left the door open. I must have done. But I feel like I have small tubes. I must have little narrow tubes because if I go on a plane, haven't done for years, but if I do, I get like the pain. Oh, not joking. It makes me not want to fly. They hurt a lot, and it shoots all the way down my neck, and it takes 2 or 3 days for me to get my hearing back. What's that about? And I have loud kids. I have really loud children, and I have a really loud husband. Paul is loud. I'm like, what's that film? Oh no, it's Friends, isn't it? Should I forget? Well, please. Anyhow, that's how I feel. And I think I'm loud too, actually. I am a loud, sometimes I can talk loud, I can get excited, I can, I feel like my volume goes up. So I think I'm quite loud as well. And I can talk really fast as well. Sometimes when I edit back, I'm like, slow down. Anyway, I'm going to love you and leave you, and I will see you on Tuesday. I'm still just so happy about this. I will see you on Tuesday. Have a wonderful weekend. Promise me this. Or a restful one. Just a wonderful or a restful, or just have a weekend. Whatever you do. And I will see you all on Tuesday. Bye from me and my squeaky door.